I was 12 years old the night my life shattered. It was late. The hospital parking lot dimly lit. The rain coming down in slow, cold needles. My mother's hand was tight around mine as we rushed through the automatic doors, the smell of disinfectant hitting my nose the second we stepped inside. She told me to sit on one of those hard plastic chairs in the waiting area. "I'll just park the car," she said softly, kissing the top of my head. I watched her walk away, her heels clicking against the tile, her coat flaring out behind her. I didn't know then that I was watching her back for the last time. Minutes passed, then an hour, then 2. I kept glancing toward the glass doors, waiting for her shadow to appear, waiting to see that familiar face pushing through. I was 12, but even 12-year-olds know how long it takes to park a car. Still, I told myself stories. Maybe the car wouldn't start. Maybe she ran into someone she knew. Maybe she was buying me a snack from the vending machine. Every excuse my mind created crumbled as the hours stretched on, and the fluorescent lights buzzed louder than my heartbeat. By midnight, a nurse finally approached me, her expression filled with the kind of pity usually reserved for orphaned children in movies. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "where are your parents?" My throat burned as I answered, "She's parking the car." Even then, I couldn't stop defending her. The nurse crouched down, placing a hand on my shoulder. "How long ago was that?" I hesitated, glancing at the clock. The truth tasted bitter. About 4 hours. That was the first night I realized silence could scream louder than words. Social workers were called. Questions were asked. My answers sounded hollow even to me. Yes, she loves me. Yes, she'll come back. But my eyes betrayed me, darting constantly toward the entrance, desperate for a sign that never came. By morning I was handed a blanket, a paper cup of juice, and the crushing truth that I had been abandoned. The world didn't stop spinning, though it felt like it should have. People still walked in and out of the hospital, their lives intact, their mothers returning from parking lots. Mine didn't. The next few days blurred together inside a foster home. I barely spoke. Every creak of the floorboards, every opening of a door made me jolt upright, expecting her. But she never came. The social worker assigned to me, Ms. Harris, was kind but firm. She told me they had tried to reach my mother. Her phone disconnected. They tried her workplace. She hadn't been there in weeks. It was as if she had evaporated into thin air. Except people don't evaporate. They choose. And she had chosen. When they told me she left because of a man, my world tilted again. She hadn't been sick. She hadn't been forced. She had simply decided I was too heavy a burden for her new life. Her boyfriend, Richard, was wealthy, successful, and apparently allergic to children. "He doesn't like baggage," she once whispered to a friend on the phone, thinking I couldn't hear. I hadn't understood then. Now I did. Baggage meant me. I replayed every memory, searching for signs. Had I annoyed her too much? Did I ask for too many things? Did she hate the way I laughed, or the way I chewed, or the way I begged her to read to me at night? Kids don't see abandonment as a parent's failure. They see it as their own. I believed I was the problem. Days turned into weeks, and I was told the state had located my father. His name was Daniel. The name felt foreign in my mouth. I hadn't seen him since I was a toddler, barely old enough to form memories. My mother had always spoken of him with bitterness. A loser, unreliable, a man who'd ruin your life if you let him. Now this so-called loser was my only option. The first time I saw him was at the social services office. He looked taller than I expected, his hair messy but his eyes piercingly clear. When the social worker introduced us, he gave me a hesitant smile. "Hi, Maya," he said softly, like the name itself was fragile. I didn't answer. I just stared at him, my arms crossed so tightly I thought my bones might snap. The car ride to his home was silent, except for the hum of the engine. I studied him from the corner of my eye, the way he tapped the steering wheel nervously, the way his jaw clenched when he thought I wasn't looking. He was a stranger, but he was also supposed to be my father. How do you reconcile those two truths? His apartment was small, cluttered, and smelled faintly of old coffee. There were no photos of me, no traces that he had been waiting for me. A single mattress on the floor, stacks of unpaid bills on the counter, and silence hanging heavy between us. I felt like I had been passed from one failure to another. The first night there, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My mind screamed questions I couldn't voice. Why did you leave? Why didn't you fight for me? Why am I never enough for anyone to stay? It didn't take long before I discovered the cracks in his story. Daniel wasn't just absent because he wanted to be. He had a record. Prison time. My mother had told me he was dangerous, and though part of me wanted to believe she was lying, the evidence sat in the tension of his every word. He avoided my questions, changed the subject, and when I pressed harder, his temper flared like a storm he barely kept contained. But here's the twist no one prepared me for. He hadn't gone to prison for hurting strangers. He had gone for protecting my mother. Years before, Richard wasn't the first man in her life who treated her like property. My father, desperate to shield her, made a choice one night that landed him behind bars. While he served time, she cut him out completely, erasing him from my life, rewriting him as a villain to justify her own betrayal. I didn't know this truth yet. Back then, all I knew was that my father was broken, my mother was gone, and I was stuck between pieces of lives I didn't ask for. At school, kids whispered. They knew. That's the girl whose mom dumped her. I pretended not to hear, but every whisper was a knife. I became quiet, invisible, convinced that disappearing was safer than being noticed. Then, months later, she came back. My mother. Out of nowhere, like a ghost stepping out of the shadows. I was walking home when I saw her car parked by the curb, her face leaning out the window. "Maya!" she called, her voice sweet and sharp all at once. My feet froze, my heart thundering. She looked the same, polished, smiling, rehearsed. But behind her eyes was something new. Desperation. She told me she wanted me back. She said she'd made a mistake. She said we could be a family again, just the two of us. But I wasn't 12 anymore. I had learned that people don't just disappear accidentally. They choose to, and she had chosen him over me. What she didn't tell me then, what I'd later discover, was that Richard had left her. All the security she sacrificed me for had evaporated, and now she wanted me, not because of love, but because she was alone. That was the moment I felt the first ember of anger in my chest, not the quiet, suffocating sadness I'd lived in for months. Real anger, because if she could leave once, she could leave again, and this time, I wasn't going to let her break me twice. When I first moved in with my father, I didn't know what to expect. He was a stranger with my eyes, my last name, and nothing else that felt familiar. At night, when he thought I was asleep, I heard him pacing the living room, muttering to himself, like he was fighting ghosts I couldn't see. His phone would ring, and he'd answer in a hushed voice, always stepping outside to take the call. I began to wonder if I had traded one abandonment for another, if maybe he'd vanish just like she did. But slowly, cracks began to form in the wall between us. It happened the night he tried to cook dinner. The smoke alarm went off, filling the apartment with shrill panic, and he stood there with a burnt frying pan in his hand, looking lost. I laughed for the first time in months, and he turned to me, a sheepish grin tugging at his lips. "Guess we're ordering pizza," he said. That night, as we sat on the floor eating greasy slices straight from the box, something shifted. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying. Still, there were shadows in his eyes I couldn't ignore. One evening, while rummaging through a drawer looking for a pen, I found a stack of letters. Prison mail. Each envelope had his name, Daniel Carter, stamped with the cold authority of correctional facilities. My chest tightened as I stared at them. He caught me holding one, and for the first time since we met, his voice cracked with anger. "Don't go through my things, Maya," he snapped, his fists clenching at his sides. I dropped the letter, tears blurring my vision. "Is it true?" I demanded. "Were you in prison? Did Mom lie about you?" He froze, his expression flickering between guilt and pain. Finally, he nodded. "Yes, I went to prison, but not for what she told you." That night, I heard the story that shattered the version of my family I thought I knew. Years ago, before I could remember, my mother had been with a man who treated her like property. My father tried to protect her during a violent night that spiraled out of control. He got arrested, and instead of standing by him, my mother testified against him. The betrayal cut so deep he spent years behind bars wondering if he'd ever see me again. I didn't know what to do with this truth. My mother had painted him as the villain all my life, but here he was, broken, flawed, but not the monster she described. Instead, she was the one who had twisted the story, erased him from my life, and handed me lies instead of love. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to demand answers. But before I could, she reappeared. It was spring when she showed up at my school. I was 15 then, old enough to understand manipulation, but still young enough to crave her affection. She waited for me by the gates, her hair styled, her smile practiced. "Maya," she said softly, "can we talk?" Against my better judgment, I followed her to a cafe nearby. She told me she'd made mistakes. That she missed me, that we could start over. My heart clenched because part of me still wanted her, still wanted a mother who would tuck me in at night and ask about my day. But as she spoke, I noticed the way her hands trembled when she reached for her coffee cup, the way her eyes darted nervously around the room. The mask slipped and I saw it. Desperation. Richard was gone. The wealthy boyfriend she'd left me for had abandoned her. She wasn't here because of love. She was here because she had nowhere else to go. The realization burned like acid. "You didn't come back for me," I whispered. "You came back because he left you." She flinched, her face crumpling for just a moment before she composed herself again. "That's not true. I love you, Maya. But love doesn't abandon you in a hospital waiting room. Love doesn't trade you for comfort." I left her sitting there, tears glistening in her eyes. But my heart wasn't fooled. For the first time, I felt power in walking away. Still, she didn't give up. She began calling me, showing up unannounced, slipping notes under my father's door. Each time she played the same role, the repentant mother, begging for a second chance. I was torn in two. The daughter who longed for her mother's love, and the girl who knew better. My father suggested therapy. At first I resisted. Talking about it felt like ripping open wounds I had only just scabbed over, but he insisted. "You don't have to forgive her, Maya," he said gently. "But you need to face what happened. Otherwise it'll eat you alive." So I went. The first sessions were excruciating. Sitting in a room with her, hearing her tearful apologies and half-hearted justifications. "I just wanted security," she repeated. "I was afraid of being alone." And every time she said it, I felt that 12-year-old girl inside me screaming, "You weren't afraid of being alone. You were afraid of being alone with me." The therapist asked me to speak my truth. My voice shook, but I said it anyway. "You abandoned me. You left me like I was nothing. And you don't get to erase that because you're sorry now." She cried harder, reaching for me, but I pulled back. My boundaries were non-negotiable. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, the therapy sessions changed. I stopped expecting her to become the mother I had wanted. Instead, I started focusing on myself, on healing, on the fact that my worth wasn't determined by her choices. But healing doesn't mean the past stops haunting you. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night, dreaming of that hospital chair, the ticking clock, the empty doorway. Other nights, I dreamed of a different future. One where she had chosen me, one where we went to Bali together, one where love wasn't conditional. Those were the hardest mornings, because they reminded me of the life I never had. Through it all, there was one unexpected light. His name was Alex. He was in my history class, a boy with kind eyes and a crooked smile. He never treated me like the girl with the broken family. He asked about my favorite books, my dreams, the things that made me laugh. Slowly, I found myself opening up to him in ways I hadn't with anyone else. One night, after a particularly brutal therapy session, I called him, my voice trembling. "Can we go for a walk?" He didn't ask questions. He just showed up. We walked for hours under the streetlights. And when I finally broke down, sobbing into his chest, he held me without judgment. For the first time, I realized love could feel safe. My mother hated him instantly. She accused him of distracting me, of pulling me further away from her. "He doesn't understand what we've been through," she snapped one night after therapy. But she was wrong. He did understand. Not because he lived my story, but because he listened. Because he cared without conditions. That was when I realized something profound. Sometimes the family you choose loves you more than the family you're born into. But just as I was learning to heal, another twist came crashing down. My grandmother, my father's mother, reached out to me for the first time. She invited me to her home, a cozy little house filled with photographs and warmth I had never known. Over tea, she told me the truth my father hadn't. The night he went to prison, it wasn't just about protecting my mother. There had been a fight, a violent confrontation, and in the chaos, he had taken the blame to shield her. My mother had betrayed him in court, testifying against him to save herself. My father had sacrificed years of his life for a woman who would later abandon her own daughter at a hospital. The betrayal was deeper than I imagined, stretching back years before I was old enough to understand. My mother hadn't just abandoned me. She had built her life on sacrificing the people who loved her most. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my chest heavy with anger and grief. But somewhere beneath the weight of it all, I felt something else rising. Clarity. I couldn't change her. I couldn't rewrite the past, but I could decide what to do with it. I could let it define me, or I could let it fuel me. And for the first time in years, I chose the latter. By the time I was 17, I had learned that love doesn't always come from the places you expect. Sometimes it arrives in the quiet presence of a grandmother you never knew. Sometimes it's in the stubborn persistence of a father who is trying to make up for lost time. Sometimes it's in the crooked smile of a boy who makes you feel safe when your whole world feels unsafe. And sometimes it's in the decision to love yourself enough to say no. But I wasn't there yet. I still hadn't faced my mother fully. I still hadn't told her the words I needed to say. The ones that had been burning a hole in my chest since that night in the hospital waiting room. She didn't stop trying. She'd show up with gifts, with promises, with apologies rehearsed so carefully they sounded more like scripts than confessions. She even brought flowers to one of our therapy sessions, placing them in front of me with trembling hands. "They reminded me of you," she whispered. I stared at the flowers, perfect, beautiful, already dying, just like her promises. The therapist asked me once, "What do you need from her, Maya?" The answer rose instantly. I need her to admit what she did. I need her to stop pretending it was anything less than abandonment. But every time I waited for those words, she danced around them, framing her actions as mistakes, as fear, as desperation. Never simply what they were. A choice. The breaking point came the summer before I turned 18. She showed up outside my school, demanding to talk to me. I tried to walk past her, but she grabbed my wrist. "Maya, please just listen." I turned to her, my voice steady but sharp as glass. "You want me to listen? Fine. Here's what I hear every night when I close my eyes. I hear the sound of your heels walking away in that hospital. I see the empty doorway. I feel the cold chair under me as I waited, hour after hour, for a mother who never came back. That's what I hear. That's what I see. And no apology will erase it." Her lips parted, her eyes filled with tears. But I didn't stop. "You left me for him. You chose him over me. And now you want me back because he left you. I'm not your backup plan. I'm not your safety net. I'm your daughter. The one you decided wasn't worth staying for." For the first time, she didn't have an answer. No excuses, no performance, just silence. And in that silence, I finally felt free. That night when I got home, my father was waiting for me. He had overheard enough to know what happened. I collapsed into his arms, shaking with the weight of everything I had said. "I think I finally told her," I whispered. He held me tight, his voice rough. "I'm proud of you, Maya. You faced her. You stood your ground. That's more than I ever managed to do." My grandmother came over later, bringing with her the kind of calm that only age and wisdom can give. She sat me down, held my hand, and said something I will never forget. "You don't need her to validate your pain. You've already survived it. Forgiveness isn't for her, it's for you. But remember, forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing to move forward without dragging her chains behind you." That night, I wrote in my journal for hours. I wrote about the hospital chair, about the letters I found in my father's drawer, about Alex's steady hand holding mine when I thought I would fall apart. I wrote about how pain carves deep, but those cracks can also let the light in. And slowly, I began to feel something I never thought I would: strength. High school graduation came like a sunrise after years of storm. I stood on that stage, valedictorian, my speech shaking in my hands. I looked out into the crowd. My father was there, my grandmother by his side, both of them beaming through tears, and behind them, almost hidden in the crowd, was my mother. She looked small, almost fragile, sitting by herself. For a moment, our eyes met, and instead of anger, I felt something else: pity, because for the first time, I realized she wasn't powerful. She wasn't the monster of my nightmares. She was just a woman who had made choices so selfish they had left her hollow. I dedicated my speech to resilience. "We are not defined by what is done to us," I said into the microphone, my voice clear and strong. "We are defined by how we rise after we've been broken. Some of us have faced storms no one else can see, but those storms are not the end of our stories. They are the beginning." The audience erupted in applause, but it was my father's tear-streaked face that stayed with me. That night, he whispered as we hugged, "You've become everything I hoped for and more, and none of her choices could stop you." College was another chapter of freedom. I studied psychology, driven by a fire to understand families, to help kids like me who had been caught in the crossfire of selfish adults. I interned at a nonprofit, worked with children who clung to stuffed animals the way I once did in foster care, and every time I told them, "You are not broken. You are not to blame," I was also telling myself. Through it all, Alex stayed by my side. He became my anchor, the person I could lean on without fear of being dropped. On my 21st birthday, he surprised me with a small silver necklace, a tiny heart pendant. "This isn't to fix you," he said, fastening it around my neck. "It's to remind you that you've always been whole." But life wasn't done testing me. My mother reached out again when I was 23. This time, she wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was asking for money. She had fallen on hard times, lost her job, and now she wanted me to save her the way she had never saved me. I sat across from her in a diner, the smell of coffee thick in the air. She looked older, worn down, the years of chasing empty promises finally etched into her skin. "Maya," she said, her voice trembling, "I need your help." For a long moment, I just looked at her. The woman who had once left me in a waiting room now sat begging for my mercy. And here was the twist. I could have helped her. I had the means, but for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't need to. "I can't give you what you're asking for," I said softly. "Not because I hate you, not because I want to punish you, but because I have finally learned to protect myself, and helping you now would only hurt me." Her eyes filled with tears. But I didn't feel guilt. I felt peace, because I finally understood what my grandmother had meant all those years ago. Forgiveness isn't about them. It's about freeing yourself. On my wedding day, my father walked me down the aisle, his hand steady on mine. "From the moment you called me from that office," he whispered, his eyes wet, "I promised myself I'd never let you feel abandoned again. And look at you now." My grandmother was there too, clapping joyfully, her face radiant with pride. My mother attended quietly, sitting in the back. She didn't try to steal the spotlight, didn't try to rewrite the story. For once, she simply existed on the sidelines of my life, where she belonged. As I stood with Alex, vowing to build a family rooted in love, honesty, and presence, I realized something profound. The hospital waiting room had once defined me. It had been the center of my nightmares, the anchor of my pain. But now, it was just the first chapter of a much longer story. A story of resilience, a story of boundaries, a story of finding love in unexpected places, in a flawed father, a wise grandmother, a patient partner, and most importantly, in myself. And as I look back now, I know this. Being abandoned didn't break me. It built me. So if you've ever been left behind, betrayed, or made to feel like you weren't enough, let me tell you what I've learned. Their failure is not your fate. Their absence does not define your worth. You are stronger than the pain you carry. And sometimes, The very moment that shatters you is the one that sets you free. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you in any way, please share it with someone who needs to hear that abandonment shapes us, but it never defines us. And remember, you are never as alone as you think.